Hello everybody, welcome again to Bedrock Basics, Badlands episode number 7. Today we're doing a working fish farm. But first, the review. When we started this world, randomly we were thrown into the Badlands. And although it's difficult, we're not intimidated. We got all these beautiful colors, Badlands surrounded by desert with a bit of a lake in the middle of it. And from here, this is where our journey began. And now we've got a little bit of a road system started. The roads really don't go to very many places yet because we're still at the early stages of this world. And you can see that the primary city mega base that we're going to build extends 100 blocks in each direction. And at where the roads come to that 100 block limit, there is going to be walls and gates. And each of those gates will be appropriately adorned. I do have plans for the future. Moving forward from here, we came across our first trial chambers thanks to a map from our cartographer. And we are just doing this review so that you have perspective of what I'm working with. The trial chambers are not that far away, and you can see our grid coordinates if you're following along with the links that were provided on our world back on episode 1. So that's where we do a bunch of our trial chambers and marked it with copper that we pulled out of that mine. Over here we have built a sphinx next to a desert temple that we found. I was going to originally make this temple into like a shrine to the nether, to the wither. And my plans changed because as I was digging down, I came across yet another trial chamber. Hello, Mr. Breeze. So as you can see, we have more copper and tough resources than what we need. Next to that temple is where we built our sphinx. And inside the sphinx we stashed our first villager, Marvin, who we trained him until he came up with mending. And then of course in the last episode you will see the adventure, or rather the quest of Marvin the Vendor. And he's offering us wonderful discounts still. Our initial starting base area is our Sandhead port, which leads right into the mega city. And if anybody out there does have an idea of what to name the mega city, I'm open to suggestions right now. So that brings our review to an end, and we will get on with today's adventure. We're going after a working fish farm. Now to do that, there's 3 main components that we're going to need today. First, we're going to turn the heart of the sea and some sea nautilus shells into a conduit, which is going to give us underwater powers, but it needs prismarine to activate. And why that's relevant is because we do need to go to an ocean monument, and our cartographer Carson here is selling ocean monument map. The main thing we're looking for out of the ocean monument is sponge. Sponge, when it's dried out, becomes a absorbent block to get rid of water. And I'm going to need that for my fish farm later on. It can only be found in ocean monuments. So here we are, having followed the map that we purchased from Carson. And you can see that the Elder Guardians generate what's called mining fatigue. This is a Fortune 3 efficiency 5 diamond pickaxe, and it takes forever just to get 1 block. And this is also complicated by being underwater and watching your little air bubbles slowly disappear as you're trying to break each individual block. Quite a pain in the butt. You can see a little flashing piece of the first Elder Guardian, who is at the center of the complex. If we can get rid of the Elder Guardians, the mining fatigue will wear off and won't come back. But you have to get rid of all 3 of them. So this is number 1. And the other 2, there's 1 in each wing of the ocean monument itself. So that's one, and you can see we still have mining fatigue, which is a cumbersome pain in the butt. Digging, 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 digging. That's way too slow. Especially when you get used to things being faster because you've worked to get better tools that are all enchanted and ready to go. Now it's a good dynamic because the idea was to force people to try and navigate this underwater maze, and these temples or monuments I should say, are quite huge, and to go through the maze of corridors is actually formidable. Now the Elder Guardian happened to drop the smithing template, which is cool. I didn't even realize it until looking at my loot. But beyond that, the Elder Guardians will each drop a single sponge, which is good, but 3 sponges isn't enough for what we need. Somewhere inside of the Ocean Monument will be a sponge chamber, and that's the real treasure that we're after. But sequence being what it is, first we go in, and we were smart enough to drink a potion of underwater breathing. And you can see how massive these complexes are. The Elder Guardians would be somewhere within the wing, and you can see these chambers are huge. And without water breathing, the whole time your oxygen would just be ticking away. There he is. He's not really that hard to kill, especially when you're using a super enchanted trident. But the whole dynamic of the mine fatigue, reducing your ability to get through the blocks, really amplifies the challenge of this complex. Okay, 2 Elder Guardians down, 1 to go. He's in the last wing here. And as we break in, again, just look at the size of these places. They're huge. These buggers could be swimming around anywhere in here. So you gotta find them and then take them down. I'm in fully enchanted diamond gear, so I'm well armed, and he's really not hard to kill, but he's hard to get to. And now that all 3 Elder Guardians have been dealt with, the mining fatigue wears off, and so does my water breathing. But my digging is back to normal speed. You can just we chew right through all the blocks, no problem at all. And really, this structure would be a bit of a joke if it wasn't for the mining fatigue. So now that we have Prismarine at our disposal, we can place the conduit, and the conduit can't be touching any block, and that includes diagonally. So we remove a space around the conduit and then build a Prismarine cage around it. I recommend looking at things like Minecraft Wiki for configurations on this. But essentially you're building a cage around the conduit with a gap between the conduit and the cage wall. Remembering things are 3-dimensional. You build a square in the X, Y, and Z axes around the conduit. Man, these aren't Elder Guardians, they're regular Guardians, and they spawn all the time. Now with the conduit active, it also gives you night vision, water breathing, and a slight modifier to your mining speed, which all works out perfectly. The conduit, the more thorough that you build the cage around it, the larger the area effect it has. It also has the ability to slightly damage monsters that are in its area, or hostile mobs that are in its area of influence. And you can see when it's maximized, it gets a little red slit down the center of it. And you can see the dimensions of the cage. It's just all 3 axes have the full square around it. Now inside of the monument itself are two treasure rooms. One has a bunch of golden blocks, which, although it's not that great, it's still part of the treasure and the history of the place, and we'll take it. Why? Because it's ours now. It's ours now, we're taking everything. We're gonna rip every block out of this sucker and use it for other builds. But we're still looking for the sponge room. And here it is. It's just a room that's got a whole bunch of sponge stuck on the ceiling. And when you find the sponge, as it's underwater, it's saturated with water. And that means that what we're collecting here is wet sponge. And after we collect it, we'll have to dry it out. It will dry out faster in the desert, and we happen to be in a desert area. So once we collect this stuff, we'll just bring it home, space it out, and with a little bit of time, you'll see the wet sponge becomes regular sponge. And if you were patient enough to sit here and watch it, you'd see a little steam graphic come off of them when they dry out. So the sponge was the hardest component to get here, as you've seen several steps to get it. And the next component is soul sand. First, to show you just that sponge absorbs all the water blocks around it. Now, if I were to throw it in the middle of the lake, the sponge would get overwhelmed. The water would replicate itself. But there's a method by going around the edges where you can slowly absorb portions and eventually absorb the whole bloody lake, which is way faster than other methods. So the next element for the fish farm is going to require a trip to the nether, because we're going to need soul sand. The sponges here deal with the water, and the soul sand, when you place them underwater, generate bubble columns. And this is all for a fish farm, but a pretty cool fish farm. So off to the nether, setting our spawn before we go. We will need a soul sand valley to find soul sand. Soul soil will not work, it has to be soul sand. Now, randomly coming through, we're in a basalt delta, and there's no soul sand here. So off camera, it takes me a day or two, but I eventually find some soul sand to use. But on the initial arrival into the nether here, I see that it's got resources, but it's not what I was after. And just while we're here, I move over to 00 coordinates in the nether, and I will eventually build a chamber down at the bottom of the nether where I will eventually generate a nether portal structure and link it to a similar one on the overworld. Now in that process, always looking at what's next and what's the big picture. Digging down from 00, the other resource that is very common in the nether and only in the nether is nether quartz. So as we dig down and block off certain areas that ghasts don't harass us on our way, we continue to dig down, and eventually we will find some. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Oh, there it is. This stuff is abundant and very common in the nether, and but it can only be found in the nether, and we'll need that for redstone components later on. So here we are. It's time lapse a couple days later, and we do have our soul sand. We've got a giant box that we've built out in the water. Okay. this was all dirt in here. And as you can see, the water's occupied, and I need to build a dirt platform underneath. Okay, we'll push this back because the bubbles from the water columns below will push up anything that swims across it up into the net and collection area. Pushes you up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put a net of cobwebs above, so that any fish or even a drown that goes across will get pushed up the bubble column, get caught in the cobwebs, essentially suffocate in the cobwebs, and then fall into a collection system. That's the overall concept, and we'll show you what it looks like in the next few moments. You'll note that right now I placed these bamboo fences in the water, and so they're waterlogged. And here we are at the bottom. Just gonna set this soul sand into the ground one level, so that it's not sitting above, and it looks a little bit more organic, that it belongs as part of the area. Because it's one thing to have a farm, but to me it's a step up when it really looks like the farm belongs in an area. And that's what I'm really going for, is not that you see weird out of place redstone contraptions, but this is a fish farm that looks like a giant fishing net, and that's appropriate, and it'll fit right into the landscape without being an eyesore, without being out of place. So overall, because we had to go to the ocean monument, get our sponge and the nether and find soul sand, not soul soil, soul sand. This build's taken, I want to say 4 days of me playing. Some people might do it faster, some people slower, but it took me 4 days, and now here I am in the editor giving it to you in a matter of minutes. Okay, you can see I've got a line of hoppers that just feed into each other, then eventually a chest, and that's my collection line. I've experimented with some other dimensions, and the easiest one I came up with is 5 wide, so that's the collection line plus 2 on each side, and it can be as long as you want. This one is 8 long. You could be 100 long or only 2 long if you wanted to. Of course, the longer it is, the more you'll collect, but I'm happy with the returns I get off of this one, and it's still at a size that I'm comfortable with. There we are. That looks much better. And the red around the outside of the soul sand is just a fire coral, which you need a silk touch tool to collect. If you don't have silk touch, any colored coral that you hit is going to come to you as a gray dead color. But if you use silk touch, it'll still retain its colors. Okay, so using the sponge, it pulls the water right out of all the adjacent blocks. And the fences, although they can be waterlogged, they're actually a water barrier. So a little bit of a duality there. We don't want more water coming in, even though the fence itself could be waterlogged. We don't want waterlogged fences. And the whole reason for that is we're going to put cobwebs on the level that's parallel to the fence line. And if water's all over here, then things won't suffocate. Correction. Fish won't suffocate. So we need it to be dry so that the fish suffocate. And we can't have the fences themselves waterlogged, because that'll cause a current into the cobweb areas. And a current will destroy cobwebs. cobwebs can be flooded, but if moving water is on them, it'll wreck them and turn them into string, and that's counterproductive. So once we have this down, and you can see I used blue stained glass as the level underneath the fences, because it blends really well with the water. And I needed a barrier block so I could create my current underneath. And this water current, you can see, is going to push everything towards the center collection. I found if I flood every single square, I come across some problems where the water converges and it overdoes it. So as much as possible, I try to minimize the amount of water blocks that I'm saturating. And this is just to make sure that my collection system doesn't get flooded, because it'll cause some inefficient plugs. But this way, as much as possible will be collected. No redstone involved at all with this. Hoppers don't count as redstone. Okay, there, the water channel is all directed to the collection. And you can see the fish come up, and then they get pushed to the middle. Well, right now the water column's launching them, but we'll have cobwebs over top to stop that. If you make a mistake with your cobweb placement, make sure that you have shears on hand. Using shears on cobwebs will collect them. If you use something like a sword, it's going to turn into string. Again, using stained blue glass for my troubleshooting here, because it blends, I find it blends best with the water, that you really don't see it from a distance. These cobwebs were taken from the trial chambers due to the weaving effect that was hitting on the monsters. That was explained back a few episodes. And here we are finally using this stuff. Okay. Go, and you can see we just finished this off, and that's not a bad looking net at all. Thanks Doc M77 for your inspiration. And that will over time start collecting fish for us. It's totally a passive mob. You really don't have to do anything to make it work, and it looks good. The last thing I'm going to do to this is to make it look like it belongs and it's not just a net sitting out there, is we add a ship. And off camera I'm going to do things like adding a crew. And I didn't bother showing you the ship. It's really nothing special, just a ship that we placed out here for fishermen to occupy and to make the fishing nets look like they're not out of place. In Norse mythology, Nord was the god of the seas, and so this is Nord's bounty. See, on board we've got space for 3 crew members. And then off camera, I'll just add crew members to this and probably add another fishing net on the other side. So it'll have a net thrown out both sides collecting fish. And then 3 fishermen on board running around saying, "Huh." The returns on this are pretty good. Just because of the warm ocean biome, it's a lot of puffer fish and tropical fish. If I were to do it in other places, you might get more salmon and cod. And that's the working fish farm. I'm really glad I was able to share this build with all you viewers. Really, thank you for all your time and spending a little bit of it with me. And that's it. I'm done for today. Until next time, bye bye.